Recovery Sort Of is a podcast where we discuss recovery topics from the perspective of people living in long-term recovery. This podcast does not intend to represent the views of any particular group, organization, or fellowship. The attitudes expressed are solely the opinion of its contributors. Be advised, there may be strong language or topics of an adult nature.
Welcome back. It's Recovery Sort Of. I'm Jason, a guy who has wondered if he's bipolar at times.
And I'm Billy. I'm a person in long-term recovery.
And today we're joined by Aaron. Hi, Aaron.
Hi, how are you guys today?
Doing all right.
Good.
How are you?
Pretty darn good.
That's awesome. So if you haven't guessed, which you probably have because I make it plainly obvious in my introduction, we're talking about bipolar today. And, we had spoken with Erin and she mentioned that was part of her story. And we thought, how many people maybe have this struggle or don't know they're having this struggle or are unaware of what's going on. And there's such correlation between mental health and, substance use and abuse and however you want to refer to that we just thought it was key that people getting off of substances and into recovery might want to explore their mental health journey. And so I'm already talking too much. I will let Erin explain exactly why she is here to help us out with this episode.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, thank you for giving me this opportunity. So I got into recovery. My recovery date is November the 16th of 2008. And when I got in, I had suffered from depression or depressive episodes most of my life since my teenage years. And I came from a family that would either throw money at it or throw meds at it. So I had been on antidepressants one sort of way or the other for years. In my 20s, which is when my drinking and using started to really take off, I would have, horrible breakdowns. And it was one of the, it's like it's in the NA basic text, it says like, could it be the drugs, And so I always knew there was something wrong. I just didn't know what it was. So when I got into recovery, everybody at the time was seeing a very specific psychiatrist in the area. So I went and was sort of reticent about getting on meds at the time, because at the time that I got clean, there was kind of a split of people who were like, well, you don't need to be on meds. It's just, you need the steps and recovery. And then the other half was like, maybe you should get on meds. So there also at that time period, depression and bipolar disorder, which I hadn't even really, delved into, wasn't as socially acceptable as it is today. Today it's like, if you're bipolar, you've got, a t-shirt and, a website and, and there's, a million people coming out and they're just like, I'm bipolar also. It was not trendy or chic at the time. It was usually used as a punchline. It's like, oh, my girlfriend's crazy bitch, she must be bipolar, and they're probably not wrong. So at the time that was not even a thing that was thrown around. So around, I got into recovery, I got involved, I stayed clean for about 5 years, and around 5 years, I got involved with a really abusive person where I got kind of isolated from my fellowship and isolated from meetings and isolated from everything. And I was living out in the middle of nowhere. And I just started to deteriorate mentally. And when I got out of that relationship, I ended up in the hospital. And in the hospital, they were like, yeah, you're bipolar 2. And bipolar 2 disorder, as opposed to bipolar 1, is characterized by what's referred to as hypomania. So mania, this is how I like to describe it. Hypomania is, I'd like to write a book about Jaws. And mania is, I am Jaws. you know. So that's how you would describe it, which means that the manic part of it with bipolar 1 is where people usually get hospitalized for, you know, thinking they're God and having sort of paranoid delusions, if you will. Whereas with hypomania, it's characterized by, you know, excessive thoughts, excessive talking, excessive swearing, excessive shopping, you know, which, and you made this comment about how, well, it's what came first, the chicken or the egg, you know what I mean? Like, is this am I just an addict, or am I an addict that deals with mental illness? And since I'd had 5 years off of substances, you know, they were able to make that distinction and say, no, this is different. You know, this is something very different. And I wanted to rebel. That was a big thing, was I could deal with being an addict. I could deal with being an alcoholic. I could deal with being, you know, labeled as, you know, depressed, but I could not deal with the bipolar tag. I just hated it. So they basically told me at the time, they said, okay, so you need to find a therapist. So yes, that is definitely good advice. They said, find a therapist, and you're going to have to be on a medication combination. So instead of like being on just an antidepressant, they put me on an antidepressant and an antipsychotic, or also referred to as a mood stabilizer. So, you know, and thus began the journey, really, because it was a lot of trial and error, and it was confusing. And I, you know, like I said, there were no, you know, bipolar support groups at the time, and there was no like bipolar Facebook chat, you know, there wasn't any of that stuff. So I found myself doing a lot of research, you know, a lot of books, and trying to figure out what this meant, and that this meant that this was going to involve a lifestyle change. Just as in recovery, when, you know, you come in and they tell you, you know, it's like, okay, you're going to go to meetings, you're going to get a sponsor, you're going to find a higher power that works for you, you're going to work steps. It was exactly like that. It was like learning a whole new way to live, but way more in depth, I would say, you know, like just way more serious, as far as you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. You know? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, the main thing that happened was I had to learn that, you know, meds and therapy were all well and good, but it was really important what I put into my body and what I did in a day. It was learning a routine that worked for me. And so manic depressive, which is what I prefer because I hate bipolar. It's like, manic depressive just sounds like, you know, I'll turn on any minute, you know, it's great. But manic depressive roughly translates from the Greek. It means mania, to speed up, and depress, to slow down. So there's two poles like this. And the way that it progresses is that there's a rise. So right here, this is where it's fun. It's very similar to being on speed, I would say. So you're, you know, you got all the ideas, you know, you're super creative, you're super talkative, you know, maybe you're swearing a little too much, maybe your filter is gone. It's very like the world is going a million miles an hour and you're the smartest person in the room. And
sounds like a Tuesday.
Yeah.
Right. There's I sent y'all a message at one point, but like there's a movie with Bradley Cooper called Limitless, and it's where he takes this magic pill, and the magic pill makes him, like, you know, smarter than everyone else, faster than everyone else, a sex god, you know, just like it's all of the wonderful feelings in the world of mania, basically. But what happens is that just as a car cannot run 90 miles an hour every day, your body, your mind, your everything cannot do that. And so it hits its peak and you think, oh, this is the best I want to feel for the rest of my life. And then that slowly turns into anxiety, rage, agitation, annoyance, and then it spirals into depression. And then you have the aftermath of that. So there's an episode you guys did, Honesty, and I think it was like 4 episodes back or something to that effect. And you brought up an Aristotle quote, which I love, which is virtue consists of finding an appropriate middle ground between 2 extremes. And the ultimate goal of any bipolar person is to live in the middle. It's not to let things go here and not to let things go here. And my best friend Amanda says it best. She said it takes a lot of work to be you. And she's not wrong. You know, it is incorporating things that you learn in recovery, like honesty, open-mindedness, willingness, incorporating the steps, incorporating personal responsibility. But on the other side, it's also, you know, don't mess with your sleep, don't mess with your meds. And it's your job, not anyone else's job. It's your job to create and design a lifestyle that keeps you in the middle. So I don't know if that was 5 to 7 minutes or 5 to 8 or more than that.
It was great. It was great. Yeah. So, I mean, where to even begin with, you know, talking about some of the things you said? I mean, for one, I definitely want to say that pop culture has, you know, it's good in a way that it reduces stigma about some of these mental health, you know, they say disorders. I don't like the word, but whatever, these mental health challenges. But in another way, it really warps our understanding of what they really are, right? I think so, and maybe we've moved away a little bit from this now, but for so long, the whole bipolar thing was like, you're moody, right? You're happy one second and mean the next or whatever, and it's like, oh, they're just bipolar. And I'm like, that's definitely not what bipolar is. And maybe that's actually a good place to start. What the hell is bipolar, right? And so if you want to look at the diagnosis, it's bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 are both, you know, characterized by these periods of, like you said, mania and hypomania, and you did a really good job explaining that. And I was glad you did too, because you said I'm bipolar 2, and I was like, not bipolar also, bipolar 2, the number, the Roman number, of course. And then you also have periods of depression. And so your mania or your hypomania, these episodes, you'll have abnormally upbeat, jumpy, or wired times. You'll have increased activity, energy, or agitation. You'll have an exaggerated sense of well-being and self-confidence, also, you know, referred to as euphoria. You'll have a decreased need for sleep, unusual talkativeness, you touched on that, racing thoughts, you touched on that, distractibility, which is, and this is where it gets so confusing when you're operating in the mental health world, right? Because so many of these also can look like ADHD, or ADHD can present as so many of these. And so it's really tricky. And it takes a lot of, like you said, monitoring and self-honesty to really nail down, because a lot of mental health is self-reported. Like, that's how we figure out what's going on with people. They tell us themselves. And so you got to be an accurate self-historian in order to really get a good diagnosis. And then back, you know, it says poor decision-making, which I think in the moment of bipolar does not feel like poor decision-making. feels like really, really smart decisions. But it gives examples of going on buying sprees, taking sexual risks, or making foolish investments. All right, so maybe that sounds like Wednesdays and not Tuesdays. And then, you know, your major depressive episodes sound a lot like any other major depressive episodes. You're going to have depressed moods, such as feeling sad, empty, hopeless, or tearful, marked loss of interest or feeling no pleasure in all or almost all activities, significant weight loss when not dieting, weight gain, decrease or increase in appetite, either insomnia or sleeping too much, either restlessness or slowed behavior, fatigue or loss of energy, feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt, decreased ability to think or concentrate, thinking about planning or attempting self-harm. And I always like to joke with people when I'm kind of evaluating them for depression. It's almost like if you do anything, you have depression, right? It's like you eat more, you eat less. You sleep more, you sleep less. Like, it's
Right.
really about the fluctuation from your norm that is helpful.
Let me ask
Oh, yeah. Go
either
ahead.
of you. There's no, I guess what you would call like a medical diagnosis for this. It really is just like something it's like you said, like self-reported. Like you have to be honest about your thing. There's no like brain tests they can do or we're aware of.
There's no brain test. Yeah, unfortunately, mental health. We don't know how to test the brain necessarily for
a lot of these things.
Right. So it's self-reported in the sense of like you share the symptoms that you're having. But I think a good doctor, psychiatrist, therapist is going to be able to also see some of the signs, right? Like generally people don't come in and say, oh, I think I'm bipolar because I'm having these ups and these downs. They're just like, man, this week I have not been able to concentrate on stuff. I like spent too much money that I really don't have. And they're telling you things. And so you're kind of picking up on, and maybe you see the shift in how they present in session, right? You're like, damn, last week you were like really down and barely here. And this week you will not stop talking about your week. And so, there are some physical signs that you see in people as they go through this. But as a therapist, that's hard to see for 1 hour a week and pick out. Whereas like your partner probably has a much better bird's eye view, which is, sometimes useful to bring a partner into session and be like, what do you see going on in this person's life?
I'm very lucky that my partner is also bipolar. We're both bipolar 2. So I think if one of us, I think we've actually talked about it, and he's like, yeah, if I was bipolar 1, we wouldn't be together. Like, because you would have killed me by now.
I'm curious, if two bipolar people living together, do your shifts in mood level like sync up like two women with their periods?
Right. No, thankfully, we do not live together. But what we do in our relationship started because I got diagnosed and had no one to turn to. And I had a friend of mine, and she was like, you should meet Christopher because, he deals with the stuff you deal with. That was just how it was put. It was not put like he's bipolar or whatever. And we touched base because one of the things, and they didn't even mention, what's interesting, they didn't mention it in that giant list of things you do when you're hypomanic. But social media is another one. It's both a trigger and it's also a warning sign. So if I'm posting thing after thing after thing, and they're all, like, I hate my life, and why can't this get any easier? And this whole thing. And that's what happened is he saw that. And he sent me this is back when I was actually still on Facebook. I've been off for about 2 years, and that was a mental health decision as well. And I went on and I posted something like very similar to that. And he messaged me and he said, mood follows action. And I was like, this motherfucker here. I was just, I was ready. I was like, school your ass, And I said, some of us deal with depression and some of us deal with bipolar disorder. So righteously indignant. And he said, and I'm one of them, kiddo. He said, I've been in and out of institutions since I was 12 years old. And that began a friendship. And I said, I don't know what to do. I said, I can deal with being an addict. I can deal with the things that go along with that. I can't deal with having this particular mental illness. I don't know what, like literally, I just said, I don't know what to do. And he said, you need to find your bipolar superpower. And I said, I don't know what that is. And he said, it'll come in time. So we developed a friendship. We became best friends, and that in turn developed into a relationship later on. And we've been together for about 4 years. So we don't sync up necessarily, but we do keep each other in check. We have a rule called the 10-day rule, which is if you have a big idea, if that big idea is still a big idea in 10 days, you're allowed to pursue it. But most of the time it's not, you know what I mean? Because we would do stuff like he would come and say like, I'm going to start a school and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do, and I'd be like, okay, or I would come to him and say, I want to be a vegan. Like, and I'm going to get a vegan cookbook, and I'm going to start a vegan website, and I'm going to learn how to cook vegan, and you're going to cook vegan too, and we're going to be vegans together. And he would just be like, okay, so 10 days. And I'm like, yeah, 10 days. And usually 3 days later, I'm just like, yeah, that was a stupid idea. And he's like, I know, babe.
And for reference for the listeners, the bipolar superpower is not the days where you put on underwear and wrap a towel around your neck like a cape and run around the neighborhood. That is not your bipolar superpower. That might be mania.
The bipolar superpower is what I found is that I've been able to use my self-awareness of my particular mental illness to help others. I've met quite a few people, both in and out of recovery, who have dealt with that, who have seen, maybe they saw a post, maybe they heard me on, they heard me in a meeting discuss it, because whenever I tell my story, that's a very large part of my story. And then they come to me and say, will you sponsor me, or can I put you in my support network, or I just got diagnosed, how do I do this? Those types of things. And so that's become my, what do you call it? My bipolar superpower is just being able to be useful and helpful to others. Because it's a very scary thing, because just as we are addicted to a high of being high, people who deal with mental illness, especially this particular one, get really addicted to mania. I talk to some friends when they're manic, and they'll say, I'm manic, and I'll be like, sad face. And they'll be like, yeah, but I this is so cool. And I'm like, okay. And I just, my next typing text is usually, what goes up must come down.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things, amongst mental health, people tend to feel better at some point if they receive some form of medication. And I think they decide they don't want medication anymore. And this is kind of across the board, but very much in bipolar, it's so easy to understand, because once you're leveled out, and you don't feel that rush, that good times anymore. And like you said, the lows suck, but the highs feel, the mania portion feels incredible. And like, who wants to give that up when you feel like you have this like godlike ability for moments of time in your life? And so people do, they have a little bit more incentive to come off their medicine than, somebody else might. And that's scary, but it's a real thing, and it's easy to understand why.
Yeah, it's kind of why I said, like, one of my cardinal rules that I live by is don't mess with your meds, don't mess with your sleep. Sleep is so important that it is, as my therapist would say, like, it's number one, because if your circadian rhythm is off, or if your sleep is off in any way, it will pull the rug right out from your meds. So it's very precarious, because a person's sleep is affected by all kinds of things. It's affected by daylight savings time. It's affected by getting a puppy. It's affected by, for women, God bless them, it's affected by their hormonal changes. So, you're consistently dealing with a house of cards, and you're consistently trying to be like, okay, I have to go to bed at this time. And that means personal responsibility. That means telling people around you, like, look, I can't watch another TV show. Like, I can't watch one more episode. Like, I have to go to bed. Right. Or else it will be very bad for myself and, the people around me. And then nutritionally, it's just important to know that, not necessarily, like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, like, I eat grilled fish and vegetables, and, that's bullshit. 80% of the time I eat like a death row inmate on suicide watch, whatever's in front of me, I'm going to eat it, which I'm working on right now. But the two things that I am very like hardline about is, I don't drink caffeine after 12. And I don't, like, 12 p.m., I don't drink caffeine after 12, right? And I don't eat sugar. I don't eat refined sugar. because I found that it disrupts. Basically, if it disrupts my sleep, it's out. So I can't take, like GNC supplements, like the fun stuff, the green tea extract, you might as well just give me lines and lines of cocaine, because it affects my sleep. And if it affects my sleep, it's like, it's completely makes me useless in the bipolar superpower department. So. Yeah.
The way you describe it, it makes me think, and maybe this is true for all humans, but maybe more so for people with a mental health challenge. It's like there's a game of Jenga sitting in front of you, and there's almost like this alter ego of yours, like pulling out the blocks on one side, and you're on the other side trying to figure out how to like roll up paper to fit in and hold the damn structure together. Like, no, we got to fill these holes, and like you're almost fighting against it. And it's not life that's doing that to you, but it is these disturbances that just come about, and you've got to find ways to kind of plug in resources to make it work anyway. And that's super challenging.
It is. It is very much a challenge. I have a great mix of people that are not mentally ill in my life, and I have a great mix of people that are what we call #team bipolar, is all the people I have on my group that deal with it and understand it, and we reach out to each other. We do team bipolar check-ins, like, hey, how are you doing how's your mania this week, how's your depression, are you in the middle, before I realized that it was as much lifestyle, and it was as much the steps, and it was as much other stuff as it was meds or therapy. I was having a manic episode maybe once every 2 months. It was like back, forth, back, forth, back, forth. We're what we call rapid cycling. And once I learned what worked for me and what worked for, my particular lifestyle, then it was one a year. Usually happens. So it's important to know what can trigger a bipolar episode. One could be it's a big event, right? So it could be getting a new job, which is both exciting and scary at the same time. It could be a new relationship. It could be the death of a parent. It could be the anniversary of someone's death. Sometimes the holidays trigger people. Sometimes it's seasonal. So like, for instance, daylight savings time, whereas most people are like, I get to sleep an extra hour, for us, it's like, oh, fuck, it's like, okay, all right. So now we gotta go to bed earlier. Gotta get up this time. We try not to live our lives very like fly by night. Like, I can't afford to, you know what I mean? Like, I can't afford to be like, I'm gonna stay up till 1 a.m. today, and it'll be fine. I'll just sleep all day tomorrow. Nope. It's like meds at 8:30, bedtime at 9:30, wake up around 7:30, and lather, rinse, repeat.
Right.
Yeah.
And I want to preface what I'm about to say by saying there's a lot of smart people who've done a lot of research to come up with this diagnostics and statistics manual and figure out these different, as they're referred to, disorders, and I still tend to question like the DSM frequently. Right now, what I've been seeing is a lot of people diagnosing bipolar at the psychiatry level and handing out the Abilifys and the mood stabilizers, the antipsychotics all over the place. And I'm not saying they're wrong. Like, I'm not one to question anybody. I have no idea. But I definitely, I get really curious about the diagnosis. And I think one of the hard things about it for people who might experience this and not understand that they have it or they're going through it is like there's this fine line between depression is not permanent. And so there are periods during depression where you get like a relief of that depressive feeling. And if you've been depressed for 3, 4, 6 months and you have a week or 2 weeks where you don't feel depressed, that shit feels fucking great. And you want to run with it. And like, so like, where is, like, that's one of my curious questions all the time is like, where is this line between, hey, you had a couple of weeks where you weren't feeling depressed and then it's actually mania? And I don't know that there really is a huge difference in the two. And that's, you know, I mean, I have not been diagnosed with bipolar, but that's definitely something that I kind of just don't let people diagnose me with bipolar because I don't ever want to know that I am, if that's the case. And it seems manageable right now. And that's another big piece of this too, right? If your life is functional and manageable and there's no life disturbance, then you're not qualified for this, this diagnosis, basically. Like all diagnoses are preemptively decided on the fact that you need to seek help because it's disturbing your life. And so if you're functional, and it doesn't really matter if you have bipolar or not, because you're fine and you don't need to go see about it. But when I guess would you say is a good time for someone to think about looking into it? Like what kind of things could be happening in their life that could say, hey, maybe I just need to think more about this and go ask some people about help?
So I would advise anybody, if they're in recovery and they're new in recovery, I would advise them to give themselves some time because, as well as anyone that it's about, you have to be clean and or whatever, sober, depending on your flavor, a certain amount of time before your brain starts to repair itself and make, normal decisions. So, a lot of stuff like would be just changes in mood that are so erratic, but not like I don't say I hate this, but like I remember being in a meeting. This is like a great story. At the time I was super offended, but now I think it's funny. But at the time it was like I told my story and the whole bipolar thing, and someone came up to me, and this is a direct quote. They said, my sister goes from like 0 to bitch in like 2.5 seconds. I think she's bipolar, And I was just like, yeah, that's not really how it works. Because we're, especially in addiction, or especially depending on the kind of drugs you did, we have a tendency to slide from pole to pole anyway. And for me, it was the frequency of these changes, and it was the severity of the changes. So like, for instance, before I got clean, I would go to the therapist when I was depressed. Like I would have very specific, like I said, I'm from a medical family. So it was very much, it's like, okay, well, I guess you're going to go to a, psychiatrist. So they would see me depressed. Right. And then they'd prescribe a med, usually an antidepressant. I get on the antidepressant, everything would be fine. I would come back to therapy, and I was probably manic during that time. And I would just be like, yeah, man, I'm great. I've got energy, and I'm working on this and I'm working on that. And, I don't think I need this therapy thing anymore, and then the therapist would just be like, yeah, I think you should come back. And I'd be like, no, fuck off. So, like, I love the way I feel. Don't take this away from me, So I would say the frequency and the severity. So just to discuss like really the downside. I mean, there's trust me, the spiral and the after effects of a bipolar episode are, a lot of the people I've talked to that had friends that committed suicide, or friends that, that didn't really like make it necessarily, were because of the after effects of a bipolar episode, meaning the shame, the guilt, the fact that they had maybe said something they shouldn't have said, done something they shouldn't have done. They talk about excessive spending, excessive sexual, different choices. And that's a big thing. It's the excessive spending, I mean, I'm here to tell you, I got 6 credit cards. Okay. And none of those credit cards were gotten, when I wasn't hypomanic. I mean, it was just like, oh, I got one. Oh, that's so exciting. Okay. Oh, they sent me another. Oh, this is so great. Like, and then before you know it, you're paying $217 in monthly fees, and you're wondering why the hell you can't, go get a bed if you want to. You know what I mean? So it comes down to like, if it's life-threatening in a lot of ways, and it's not really necessarily like life-threatening is one very big part of it, but if it compromises your ability to have a life, and if it's your quality of life too. I was once disinvited to Thanksgiving dinner because of the way I acted when I was manic. I want to say it was brought on by a breakup, I think is what happened. And oh, no, it wasn't. It was a pharmacy mess up. The pharmacy had given me double my dosage of meds. And I didn't know that. I had started taking them like normal, and I didn't feel right. And I just couldn't figure out why I didn't feel right. And then I peeled off the label. I was just screwing around, just like we do, fidgeting. And I peeled off the label, and it had a different thing on. And I was like, oh, I've been taking the wrong medication. But by then the damage was done. I had already yelled at people, and, you lack a filter. So you just kind of say whatever you're thinking, and there's nothing to stop you. Once you're in the, once the horse has left the stable, that's the horse has left the stable. All you can really do is minimize the fallout. And it can be, and the fallout of it can be very emotionally crippling. Another thing that happens is that a manic episode tends to follow the same chemical makeup as an epileptic seizure. So after an epileptic seizure, you usually have a very foggy brain and you can't remember what happened during the seizure. And it's very similar to that with a manic episode, where after the manic episode is done, you're very foggy, you can't concentrate, you're sort of like, oh, what did I say? What did I do? And that's horrible, because then you're left going, okay, who do I apologize to? Okay, what do I need to do? And then people will come to you and say, oh, you said this, or, oh, you did this. And that is very scary, So like I said, Aristotle, stay right here. Because mania, in theory, sounds fun. In theory, it sounds great because you're super creative and you're super, you're the life of the party and all of that. But then, like I said, it turns. It just like drugs turn, So.
This episode has been brought to you in part by Voices of Hope, Inc., a nonprofit recovery organization made up of people in recovery, family members, and allies. Together, members strive to protect the dignity of those that use drugs and those in recovery by advocating for treatment, harm reduction and support resources, and mentoring. Please visit us at www.voicesofhopemaryland.org and consider donating to our cause. Does it seem like certain things trigger manic episodes and certain things trigger depressive episodes, or is it just any major life changes can trigger whatever?
So in order for you to get to the depressive episode, you have to have a manic episode. So in other words, depressive episodes don't happen without one. One doesn't happen without the other, basically. Now there are the Journal of Medicine is trying to make it a spectrum disorder, in which case there would be like a bipolar 3 and a bipolar 4 and a unipolar and a, a lot of other things where people experience, more depression and then more mania and more, but I mean, in the way in which I have it, which is bipolar 2, it's like you can't get here without getting here.
Right.
So, big life changes, anything that interrupts your sleep. It's also where it comes from is very important. I didn't know if you guys had done any research on that, but it's 80% genetic and it's 20% environmental. So my father was bipolar. My great grandfather was bipolar. I didn't really stand a chance,
Yeah, the way you described that, it did. It sounded a lot like the drug use, right? When you have the drugs and they're plentiful and everything's flowing, everything's a great time, and then coming out of that into that, that down period, that sadness, and not really having a clue what in the fuck just what happened for that period of time. You mentioned the genetic part of this, and they talk about the risk factors. And so risk factors don't necessarily mean that, like, if you do this, you have this or any of that, but they're things that highly correlate, right? So when they talk to people who have bipolar, they say, oh, they have all these things in common as well. So they're like correlating risk factors. And basically the correlating risk factors are someone in your family or drug or alcohol abuse. It's like, oh, okay. And that's one of those things, like, we say someone in your family, but this hasn't been around all that long. We haven't been really monitoring all that long. Stigma has kept a lot of people from seeking help. And so there might not be any diagnosed people in your family. It doesn't mean that they weren't there or didn't exist. And I think this also, talking about the drug or alcohol abuse portion, you know, maybe bipolar is a little over-diagnosed in regular population, but it's going to skew towards our population of people in recovery having a much higher percentage than the typical population of society. So it's definitely prevalent and out there for sure.
Absolutely. And I would agree that, for instance, my father, I didn't find out that my father was bipolar until he died. Because I had a long discussion with my uncle, and we sat there talking, and he was like, you know, your dad was manic depressive. And I was like, you know, qu'est-ce que c'est? You know, my father, the Mensa member, the doctor, the engineer, the guy who rode motorcycles, like that guy was bipolar. And he was like, oh yeah. He said he would get really obsessed with things for periods of time where he would like buy a bunch of stuff, and then he'd be really into it, and then he would be not into it at all. It was like it never happened. And I was like, yeah, that sounds about right. And my father, who was also an alcoholic, he used, I believe that he somehow managed to make it work, and that his mania was what drove him to be, you know, the best baby doctor in town at the time. He delivered over 6,000 children. And I think that when he would come home, you know, you're still kind of up here. And I think in order for him to calm that, I think that's why he drank. You know, I think there was a part of that was, there was a genetic component, because his father and grandfather were both alcoholics. But also I think it was, you know, being someone who's unmedicated and, you know, living a very sort of fast-paced lifestyle, and from a different generation, from a generation where that kind of thing wasn't really diagnosed or discussed. Not to mention, doctors don't like to admit that they're sick.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like they're the worst patients ever. So yeah, it's, you know, correlation doesn't equal causation kind of thing. But like, I feel usually the people I know that are bipolar have some family member in some way that had that, you know, that dealt with that. But like I said, if you're from a family where that's not talked about, or you're from a family where they, you know, don't necessarily agree with like going to therapy or anything like that, it would be very hard to find that. It'd be very hard for someone to find out, you know, like that they had it or not had it. So for me, it required a lot of, just a lot of research, you know, just a lot of research, and finding the right therapist was another one, you know. I found a therapist that was both in recovery and understood bipolar disorder. And I had seen people at the time in recovery who were bipolar, who were on a very specific med that I will not mention, but it's very popular with bipolar. And I told him, I said, don't put me on that. I don't want to be a zombie. That was my whole thing, was I don't want to lose my edge. Like, I don't want to be a zombie. I don't want to lose my personality. I don't want things to be muted. That was very important. And he was like, no, I would never put you on that med, because that med is a salt, and you live in Florida, and you will sweat it out your glands, and it won't be as effective. And I said, okay, cool. You know, which was interesting, because my boyfriend was on it at the time, and he had an outside job where he would sweat and sweat and sweat, and he would start to have episodes. And I said, you may want to talk to your doctor about that, because my therapist said this and this. And then he talked to his doctor and got switched over to something else, and he didn't have those issues anymore, you know. So he and I have a tendency to educate each other when we find out information. You know, we're very gentle with going like, hey, are you a little manic today? You know?
If you've got the overwhelming urge to deliver 6,000 babies or to father 6,000 babies, you might want to go get checked out for sure.
I mean, it's almost like I would love to do like a, you know, like the old like Jeff Foxworthy, you might be a redneck. It's like you might be bipolar if, you know.
Right. Maybe that's your superpower coming up.
Yeah.
Like if you think it's a good idea to write a book about, yeah, I mean, you might be bipolar. But the other important thing is how the steps play into the recovery from mental illness is another one, because granted, the steps are not everything. As we said, you know, we talk about there are other things as far as medication and therapy and such, but the steps help you get a leg up. In my opinion, they helped me get a leg up because it taught me the idea behind, you know, ask for help and don't tell the help how to help you. Was important. You know, divorce yourself from the results, you know, and clearing out the wreckage of the past was a big one. Making amends. I had to make amends for not paying rent to a relative to the tune of $4,800 because I experienced a manic episode. I was on the wrong meds, but I was on a different med cocktail, and I was just, that was what I was doing with my rent money. I was just spending it and eating it and, you know, whatever I could. And so when I got to 8 and 9, that was a thing I had to do. You know, I had to make amends for that, and that occurred in recovery. You know, that wasn't, I couldn't blame it. I couldn't say like, oh yeah, well, you know, I was high, I don't remember, blah blah blah. It was like, no, you know, this happened and this happened, and the importance of honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. Because had I been honest from the very beginning and said, look, I don't think that I can. Number one, I don't think that I'm responsible enough to have a house and rent it. Number two, because I think I only had like 6 years clean at the time. And number two, I'm experiencing these changes in my body and I don't know what they are, and I think I'm in trouble. You know, if I had said that at the very beginning, none of that would have happened. You know, if I had just been honest about it. And then, you know, with 10, it's a constant, you know, understanding that if I, you know, fly off the mouth and say something that's inappropriate, then you better make amends immediately, you know, and keeping things level. And then 11, you know, developing a relationship with a higher power that's not me, you know, because of course, when you're manic, you know, you are your higher power, you know. And then 12, you know, and then taking that information and using it to be useful and helpful to others. You know, so it all plays into it, you know. But I've always said that it's not all there is. I have been to meetings where people have shared about mental illness or shared about, you know, going through something, and having people immediately retort with, you know, well, it sounds like you don't have the willingness. Sounds like you're not working the steps.
Yeah. And I think another, while I don't always necessarily buy into the actual addiction definition or that it's a total thing, I'm a little, you know, iffy about all that. But I love the way it reduced shame for me when I walked in the door. It's like, oh, I suffer with this thing, not so much that it's me, right? And I like that can kind of translate over to any mental health challenge as well. It's this thing. It's not me. Do I need to own the things I've done? Absolutely. But I don't necessarily have to take on that I'm a bad person because of these things. And I like that correlates over as well to bipolar.
Absolutely. I can tell you that when my brain starts to speed up and I can start to see it, I used to get really scared. Like I used to get like, oh my God, like, why the hell can't you just be normal? What did you do? Did you sleep wrong? Did you eat the sugar? What did you know? And then just beating myself up in this like shame spiral. Whereas now it's like, okay, so I'm sweating profusely. I just ordered a bunch of shit off Amazon that I shouldn't have. I've been a little bit of a chatty Cathy lately. Okay, so perhaps we need to do some things to put us back in the middle. And we also need to let our support network know that we're in a little bit of a, not a danger zone, but a gray area right now, where it's kind of like, this could or could not be bad, which is importance of having a supportive partner, even if your partner's not, bipolar. It's just importance of having a partner that understands and that can communicate, right. And that can also, you were talking about, can see those sort of almost imperceivable changes in a person's mood or the things they're doing, like it's like 6 credit cards show up,
Well, and with the steps, so I have someone I'm close with in my life that's bipolar and is also in recovery, and I know for her, like, the steps let her or help her figure out like morals and values, and then how is the way I'm living, is that in accordance with these values? Because as she'll say sometimes, like, she'll get into these episodes where she wants to just blow shit up, you know what I mean? Just quit her job, quit her life, quit everything, run off somewhere, do something else. And it's like, well, is that in accordance with, the mom that I want to be, or the wife that I want to be, or the partner that I want to be? And maybe not. So maybe we should think about that for a minute before we react. So the steps have been really, crucial in that area as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The other thing is managing your schedule. Like I do mainly Zoom meetings. Like I still do Zoom meetings. I do all my step work over Zoom, and we're in kind of a state right now in the area in which I live in where people just, pretend like we're not in a pandemic. So so it's easier for me to just kind of stay safe and stay healthy. So I have that. And one of the things is, like, if people invite me to like big events, even if we weren't in a pandemic, it's up to me to know what my mental state is to say yes or no. If someone says, hey, I need you to drive 45 minutes to this celebration, I will basically say, hi, I would love to. I'm not going to, but I will be there in spirit, and congratulations on your recovery. And that's not something that I used to know how to do, because you want to please everybody. You want to be everyone's friend. You want to be that go-to person for things. And it's like, no, if it's a big event, that's usually, it's like I get one big event a week. Whatever that is, I get to decide. But I mean, I just can't, I wish that I could do all the things like I used to in my 20s, when it was just like, I'm going to stay up all night and then I'm going to go to work and do this,
I think you've touched on this entire list of triggers, but I want to run it down for people who either A, are new to the bipolar community and want to know more about what can affect, their swings, or for people who just want to kind of monitor themselves and think, oh, do these things make a difference in my life? So we talk stress from major life events, both positive or negative, lack of sleep, erratic schedules, caffeine and alcohol, certain medications such as antidepressants or corticosteroids, seasonal changes, stopping bipolar meds or varying the treatment schedule, thyroid problems, and substance abuse. And I think the only one that you hadn't mentioned was thyroid problems. But yeah, those are all things that can definitely trigger shifts for your bipolar. So if you wanted to, maybe if you journal, like this is where journaling comes in a lot of handy. And if you write down, things you did each day and then your moods, and you can kind of see patterns. So then we get to coping strategies, as if these are going to be super helpful. But no, they'd mention things to help you cope if you are struggling with bipolar. And you've mentioned some of these as well. Control stress is one of the biggest ones. And I think the first thing that comes to my mind is, how the hell do you do that, right? But I think this is another place where recovery can come into play, right? Talking about acceptance and surrender to things outside of our control, the serenity prayer, right? This is ways to control stress. keeping a regular schedule. You've mentioned that. Practicing healthy sleep habits. One that I don't know that we've talked about on here yet is get moving. Studies show regular exercise can help improve mood. I'm not sure that that's totally,
I totally forgot about that. It's funny because my therapist is always like, you getting exercise, and it's like he even he says it's not negotiable, Aaron. So one of the wonderful things about getting a puppy was that I was super out of shape. Like, I mean, cardiac wise, I was just like I couldn't walk from here down to the stairs. I was just not in good shape. And I got a puppy, and all of a sudden I have to move every hour, and I have to go down 2 flights of stairs every hour, and up 2 flights of stairs, and I have to carry a puppy, and I have to do all of these things. And so it got me moving, and it got me into really, really good shape. And then as a result of that, I started lifting weights, and I found that the lifting weights actually helped with the sleep. And it also helps with keeping your hormones level, and it just helped with like my mood. I mean, I hate to be that asshole, who's just like, like I felt shitty before I exercised. Now I feel so good, and it's like, I hate to be that person, but dude, exercise works. It makes it really, I mean, granted, I ain't gonna become a CrossFitter, like that's not happening. But walking is something that has helped me get in touch with meditation, and just because it's the time that I can just kind of like go and focus and enjoy nature and get sunlight, which is very important. Traditionally, people who suffer from mental illness or bipolar disorder are vitamin D deficient anyway. So sunlight is very, very, very important. And when I can't get sunlight because, it's fucking Florida and sometimes it rains, I have a happy lamp, which mimics vitamin D light, and I plug it in. And as long as I don't leave the damn thing on all day, I can get a little bit of vitamin D action, so to speak. But yeah, exercise, movement in general is important. It's important. Just, you don't have to join Orange Theory. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to get a trainer,
Right.
It's just like, hey, I took a walk today.
Well, and I think one thing people forget about sometimes with physical movement is the fact that it is a meditative / mindful experience, right? Anytime you're moving, you are connecting your brain and your body more so than you were previously. And a lot of times, especially if, we start in the not greatest shape, we're connecting to our breath too, because we're like, holy fuck, I'm out of breath, right? This is hard to do. So there is a lot of self-monitoring in that, which I think is absolutely beneficial, even besides the movement and, all the other parts that you mentioned. Another coping strategy, imagine that, write it down, keep a journal that makes note of big events, stresses, and how much sleep you're getting and what you're eating and drinking. Shocking, right? Like, these are
inventory.
Oh, there it is, right, inventory, right. And big letters, patterns. Just pay attention to the patterns in your life. Like you said, this isn't something that you kind of figure out right away when you might get some inklings that something's a little off, but a lot of things are off when you first take all the substances out of your system. But yeah, it's watching these patterns over time, figuring out exactly what's going on, why, and all of this can very much come from a program of recovery that helps you look more at yourself and keep track of yourself and, take tabs on you and what's going on. And so I can see how a lot of recovery processes definitely could assist with this. And it's unfortunate, like you said early on, I kind of encountered a similar thinking in a lot of people of like, nope, you don't need any of the mental health medication. That's all just more drugs to mess with your brain. You just need these steps and you'll be good. And, it's your fault if you can't do it. And I hope we are moving further and further away from that kind of message, because that is none of our goddamn business in a meeting.
And that would be, I guess, a follow-up question would be, besides just that idea, are there other things in recovery that maybe don't apply to people with like a mental health issue or with bipolar? Or are there some things that are like, maybe that's an area that you need to stay away from?
Interesting. Well, okay. I'm going to say it. It would be getting involved in too much service. And I know that sounds like, okay, well, that's kind of contrary to the things that we learn, because you learn, like, you know, you've got to be of service, you got to sponsor the person in front of you, and you learn all of that. But um, I know that it is very easy, especially when a person is manic or hypomanic, to start signing up for committees, you know, and get, you know, it's like, I'm gonna get involved in area service and public service and NH&I, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to sponsor 9 people, and we should set up a sponsorship tree group. Like, I mean, dude, I've been that person, man. I've been the person who was, when they were hypomanic, like, started just signing up for random, you know, like, oh, a learning day, of course I'll come, you know. And what usually ends up happening is that once that ends and you're starting to do that, like, spiral, you don't want to be around anybody. You know, I made a really good illustration, which was what a list looks like when you're manic, and it's very you know, it's very long and it's very detailed, and there's all these types of things on there. And then when you start to do the agitation depression part of it, you take like a big marker and you're like, fuck all of this, you know. You know, because you start to become when I start doing this, like, sort of spiral, all of a sudden, you know, people you love become people you hate. You become more sweepingly judgmental of things, and you just don't want to be around people. Things are very irritating. People are irritating. So you can only imagine if you sign up for, you know, you sign up for all of these committees, and then all of a sudden you're in the committee. I mean, you're just like sitting there like this, just like, man, fuck these fucking people, you know. And so, like I talked about managing schedule and lifestyle. One of the things that you have to be aware of in recovery is just, you know, don't go crazy with the service. It's very easy to burn yourself out, and it will trickle down into the people around you.
Right.
So, just, you know, hey, maybe one commitment is good, you know, like, because I've heard it, service junkie, you know, I've heard that expression. And for people that deal with bipolar disorder, it's like, oh, okay, you know. And so when that happens, or when I feel like things have become very overwhelming because I've made a list or something like that, what I do is I dumb it down to 3s. So it's like, I can do 3 things in a day. Yes, I can do 3 things in a day. I can do 3 self-care items in a day. Yes, that's not overwhelming to me. That's the middle. In my opinion, the 3s are the middle, because it's not fuck all of you, or I'm going to do everything. It's like, okay, I can do these things right here. This is manageable. This is okay. The other thing that's not on that list is, because I talk about stress management, music is another really big one for me. You know, if I'm listening to the same frenetic song over and over again, like some kind of fucking Teletubby, you know, just like again, then there's a chance that I could be edging into mania, you know. But if I tend to keep my music choices very, you know, soft rock, if you will, then it actually lowers my blood pressure, which then lowers my heart rate and keeps me more, you know, on this little level right here. So, yeah.
And there's a lot of research being done right now about not just music, but music's tie into movement and how movement and rhythm can affect our regulation as bodies, right? And if you think about bipolar, like you think about mania as more, like you said, frenetic, maybe more jerky type movements, I want to say, and you think of like depressive sides of that as like not much movement at all. And so, you know, this regulation and rhythm of like this fluid kind of middle ground, exactly like you're talking about. We are running up against time here, Erin. Is there any final thoughts about bipolar or anything you want to share?
Yes. You know, if you do get diagnosed, or you think you might be bipolar, you know, it's important that you gotta be your own health advocate. You gotta ask as many questions as possible. You've gotta interview your potential therapists and psychiatrists and doctors as if you we're, interviewing a sponsor. Ask as many questions as humanly possible, do the research, and then really understand that this is your life and become self-aware and, understand that what works for one person may not work for another. And, everything is subject to change, because the way that I led my life in active addiction versus the way I led my life in early recovery versus the way that I live my life today is very, very different. And there's a certain amount of acceptance that has to be practiced with that, like where you just have to be like, well, this is just how shit is right now, okay, it could change, so, but the other thing is it's not a death sentence. You can look at it as an affliction or a gift, and the important thing is knowing that, if you have a good support network and you're able to stay in the middle, you're going to be okay. And you're just that you're going to be okay. If I can touch one person or educate one person about it today with this, then I've done my job. So.
That's so awesome. So I think we've done everything I can do with this episode. That's for sure. We really appreciate you coming on, Aaron, and sharing your story, the highs and lows, so to speak, of it. And, man, just keep doing the thing you're doing and helping people. We appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. You guys have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Take care.
Did you like this episode? Share it with people you think might get something out of it. Check out the rest of our episodes at recoverysortof.com. Also, while you're there, you can find ways to link up with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, YouTube, anything. We're always looking for new ideas. Got an idea you want us to look into? Reach out to us.